Hi, everybody. This is Paul Zach from Immersion Neuroscience here along with George Barraza. Welcome to our discussion of what we found on our Super Bowl analysis of immersion. So what really drives people to remember, to act on, and to share ads that come out of the Super Bowl? So we love testing the Super Bowl. We do this every year because it's the biggest playground for advertisers. And we want to see if that playground is rocking the world or doing poorly. So we're going to see a little of both in today's webinar. So we're going to get started by introducing ourselves and Immersion Neuroscience. And we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. Feel free to use the chat component. If you've got questions, we'll sort of log those while we start talking. And we'll figure out who the winners and losers are in the Super Bowl and draw some conclusions hopefully you all can use as you think about the content you create. So we're Immersion Neuroscience. We're a 15-year overnight success. George and I are founding partners of the company, and we have been doing work on measuring neurologic signals to assess the impact of content for 15 years. And in the last year or so, launched a company which creates software as a service so anyone can do this by using wearable sensors and a software platform that does unnatural things to the data we pull out of people's brains through a sensor worn on the forearm, and allows us to watch in real time for any number of people the impact on people's brains of content. And that content can be live events, it can be advertising and marketing. We're working heavily in training and education, and so lots of applications to understand when content really grabs your brain. And that's what we care about. When it grabs your brain, the brain tags its information as important, particularly when there's high emotional content to that information. Then the brain is more easily activated by this information. It's more easily recalled. The information is more likely to be acted upon. So we have worked extraordinarily hard, doing a lot of basic science and then just lots of client work over the last 15 years to really build algorithms that take neurologic data and turn those into actionable insights. And so we're able to predict for a variety of factors like sales bumps, like recall, like social shares, like purchases, what people will do by measuring brain activity, and able to do that with 85% accuracy. So again, that's why it's a 15-year overnight success. We beat the crap out of these brain signals that we've squished into a single measure we call immersion. So let me tell you what immersion is, and then we'll go and look at what we did for this year's Super Bowl. So we've shown in our published research is that to really grab you neurologically and motivate you to take an action, two things have to happen in the brain. The first is that you have to attend to the information. And attention does not come for free. It's metabolically costly. It comes from the prefrontal cortex, but it also raises your metabolic rate. So we can measure this multiple ways, and we certainly have. And so one of the things that we pull out of this wearable sensor is whether you're attending to the information. But the second is, importantly, that you've got to care about the information. So care is this emotional resonance with the content that you're viewing. So when you have this emotional resonance, as I said earlier, your brain tags this as important. And it says, oh, here's something in my environment, that's attention, and here's something that seems really important to me. I should actually absorb this information and take it as important to me, important to what's going on in my life. So our software platform allows clients to create an event. Then you go to wherever that event is, a market research lab, a live event, a classroom, ask participants to put on sensors on their forearm, and then you push start, and the data roll in real time. So the real time is quite difficult to do, requires some fancy signal processing mathematics, but you can watch that event unfold and pivot in real time. You can make changes. You can use this over and over as part of the creative process to begin to optimize content for maximum impact. So we've been thrilled to work with clients that do that and see the outcomes in the movie industry. We work heavily now in TV content, online content, UX, and lots of other areas. So we all want to have a great experience, And so Immersion Neuroscience is the tool that allows content creators to create a high return on experience. So besides measuring immersion during an experience, the software platform allows clients to improve or guides them on how to improve the content they're creating by quantifying peak immersion, that is the length and depth of highly impactful events on the brain. It measures neurologic frustration. This is an interesting neurologic state in which you're attending to the information, but you don't care about it. So we want to get rid of that. And we also have an algorithm that identifies neurologic super responders. We call them evangelists. So our research has shown that these evangelists not only will act on the information immediately, they want to help you leverage that content for higher impact. That is, they'll talk about it, they'll share it. And so if you acquire demographic information for the participants in a sample, then you can follow up and begin to target them because they want to help you generate higher impact for what you're doing. So we'll focus here on overall immersion of these ads, but just to note that the software platform, because it's software as a service, allows individuals to begin to modify test content to drive up the peaks and reduce frustration. When you do that, overall immersion increases. So the Super Bowl, as I said in my intro, is really interesting because it's just the highest playing field you can be on. This year's commercials were booked out at $5.3 million for a 30-second commercial. And the question is it worth it? And so in the olden days, like a couple of years before we started, the best measure, or maybe the most common measure of impact, was the USA Today Ad Meter rankings that asked people, do you like this commercial on a 1 to 10 scale? Lots of problems with that, right? One is that you're really asking the conscious brain to relate its unconscious emotional experience. And liking, we just think is the wrong word, right? I don't care if you like the commercial. I care if that commercial grabs your brain and moves product, right? That's what the algorithms we develop for Immersion Neuroscience tell us. And in particular, that emotional resonance is important. So, as we'll see in just a second, there are commercials that people say they like. Awesome, love that. But do not have this high impact on their brains where they want to act on the information, or they will act on the information, they'll share it. And that's what we're measuring. So these are different animals. I still think liking is important. I don't want to say throw out self-report, but I think what we're doing complements that and maybe replaces it because it gets to the impact. That is where immersion is the leading indicator for the impact of that content. So as an example, last year, 2018, the #1 ranked ad for immersion was this ad for Coca-Cola Groove. You can Google it later and watch it. It ranks number 65, which is last place for liking. This is a perfect example of the difference between liking and immersion. Do I care that it's likable or not likable? No, this ad is a train wreck, but you can't look away, and it really grabs you. So that is important. And when we looked at, and as we'll see this year as well, we looked at metrics of success. For example, Coca-Cola in 2018 first quarter saw their first sales bump since 2010 for lots of reasons, and one of those likely was the advertising they did on the Super Bowl. These were very innovative, unusual, grab your brain and shake it up hard kind of ads. Not traditionally likable ads, but hey, if I see a train wreck, I gotta look, and I probably care if people are getting injured. So train wreck ads sometimes work. So you're gonna see a lot of interesting findings from this year's Super Bowl ad that have that contrast, where they're not likable, but oh my gosh, I can't look away. So what we're looking at is measuring a leading indicator for market impact. So we looked at 2018 Super Bowl ads. We saw very strong correlations in the 0.35 range between immersion and metrics of impact, including YouTube views, YouTube comments, shares. So we'll see the same thing in this year's Super Bowl ads as well. So we really want to drive ROI for the content that creators make. And to know if it's good or bad, we need to have benchmarks, we need to have measurement, and our measurement is passive. Doesn't require you come out of the situation to turn a dial or tell us what you think. We can get it second by second, as you'll see, and we've actually animated some of the videos. So that's basically the setup. So again, lots more information on the website, ImmersionNeuro.com, lots of case studies, and the punchline here is that I don't care about liking. And if you're a content creator, if you're an advertiser, if you're a company, I don't think you care about liking, right? I think you should care about impact. And impact, immersion, is what drives sales. Impact is what drives, immersion is what drives social shares. Immersion is what motivates word of mouth. And we see that in things like YouTube comments. If this is a weirdo ad that I can't look away, that grabs and shakes my brain, I want to talk about it. So what I'm going to do now is turn it over to George Barraza, the Chief Technical CTO of Immersion Neuroscience. And George will go through the details of the study that we ran this year's Super Bowl, which, by the way, we ran live for the first time. We used to do this a couple of days after the Super Bowl. This year it was live at a bar, and it was just a ball to do this. And that's one of the values of the platform, is getting information immediately, not waiting weeks to find out what's what. So I think I'll turn this over to George Barraza. Pick it up, George.
All right, thanks, Paul, and hi everybody. Welcome. I'll start off by, posing a couple questions that we had in our work as we were going through the data. We wanted to answer a couple questions, which are: what are the most immersive ads during a Super Bowl? Can we rank them in a way much like the USA Today ad meter? And because the ad meter is so ubiquitous, so we see it all over the place, how do our rankings compare to those that we see in the ad meter? Now, we know that we're dealing with self-report, so we should assume that there are some differences, and Paul covered a couple of reasons why we should see differences there. But can we pull out some sort of storyline or narrative that helps us explain why we might see some of these differences in ranking? Another thing that we tested was whether ad length or the genre of the type of ad, humor versus the kind of advertising, right? The pull on the heartstrings types ads, do those tend to perform differently when it comes to immersion? And then finally, we once again looked at YouTube metrics. These are not perfect, these are not ideal, but at least gives us these numbers to try to correlate or connect our immersion metric to something out there. All right. So what did we do? Like Paul said, we did this live. We had a space in a restaurant, a large room, felt a little bit between a living room and a bar, if you can picture it. And we invited 38 people to come join us for the Super Bowl. Some of these were fans, some of these were casual fans, some hardcore fans, and some people that just came along for the ride. There was a large screen, a big patio for them to see the Super Bowl live. We provided plenty of snacks and drinks for the occasion. So as they checked in, we placed sensors on them. And they were throughout the game. And much like Paul said, this is extremely passive. So they place the sensors and they essentially don't do anything after that from a user standpoint. As the Super Bowl was playing and as the ads were playing, we alerted them when the ads were showing. And so every time the ads would show, we would alert them, they would orient themselves, and they would watch the ads. As they were watching the ads, our software captured this data at essentially about 100 times a second, but we show this stuff at second by second to be able to provide you with a real-time measurement of immersion. So once the Super Bowl ended, we basically had our metrics for each and every ad that we expose people to. Okay. So what were our results? If you remember, the first question was, what was the most immersive ad? Or what were the most immersive ads? And what we found was actually pretty surprising. And if you'll excuse me, I'm going to switch from my slides to a video. Some of you might have an issue listening to the sound, but let's see how that works. Okay.
Wireless for $20 a month. That's not right.
It's right, all right. Now, chunky style milk, that's not right.
I choose chunky style milk because it has the wholesome chunks growing kids need, unlike smooth style milk.
Hey guys, save some chunks for me.
Oh, that's not right.
Kind of like your wireless bill. Mint Mobile is easy, online, and just $20 a month. Right now, buy 1 month and get 2 months free at mintmobile.com.
Okay, so what do we see there? We see quite a few things. Hold on one second. Let me go back to our slides.
So we call this the camelback design. So you see these two humps as George pulls up the data on the chunky milk. So again, it's not a likable ad. It's an ad that is really weird in the beginning. People are drinking chunky milk. It's making a claim about sort of the right kind of mobile provider. And then it really finishes on a high note. So you get this initial hump of immersion. Oh my gosh, what the heck's going on? People are smiling, but they're drinking what looks like spoiled milk. And then at the same time, you get this second factor, which is, oh, now I get it. Now this is a joke. This is funny. This is weird. Ah. So again, not classically likable, but very immersive to the brain. And that's what we're talking about. So again, if you had to say, should we air this ad, and you were a traditional creative, you say, well, you know, it's weird, it's interesting. Is it likable? No, I don't really like it. But that's not the point.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And you see that here, right? You see the double hump that Paul talked about. And this actually follows quite a bit of what we've seen in other ads that are very effective, is that you have an initial hook that is provided that creates an initial burst in immersion, and you have some sort of catch, some sort of something that is kind of an aha moment, or something to break the ice to some degree. And you see it here, right, is that there's an element of disgust here, right? So this is kind of repulsive. You shouldn't like this. And you see the drop in immersion happening right when you get that close-up of that chunk, those chunks going into the glass of milk. But as it progresses, you get the humor in it, right? And you get the father coming in saying, you know, save some for me, and they all start chugging along with that. I'll talk a little bit more about this video moving on, because we did find other kind of interesting results from this. Okay, so how do they compare to our ranking? How do our rankings compare to ad meter rankings? We find something similar to what we found in the past, is that many of our top ads really didn't make it into the top 20 or even top 30 of the ad meter ranks. In fact, Mint Mobile, the one that we just showed as our #1 ad, was number 53. So very, very close near the end. And it shouldn't be surprising, because it does feature that experience to discuss. So as people are thinking back, how much do I like this ad? Well, it was kind of gross, right? So maybe I didn't like that ad so much. So our own kind of way of thinking about content is not necessarily the same way that our brain thinks about the content, or is immersed within that content. And so we see a lot of surprises in here, which I can talk about in detail during the Q&A. But just to show that there really is quite a bit of difference in terms of that liking element and what we find in terms of immersion. And I'll say that overall this year, many of the ads that were successful were the ones that broke out from the crowd. We saw a lot of kind of cinematic, or, you know, big Hollywood spending type of ads this year. We saw a lot of ads like the Bud Light with Game of Thrones, where there was these mashups. Many of those did not do that well. The kind of feel-good ads, the pull on your heartstrings or advertising ads, not any of those broke into our top 10, and we can talk about that later as well.
And we should say immersion runs from 0 to 10, so these differences are generally statistically significant once you get a difference around 0.1. So Mint Mobile, you know, by far the winner, and we'll dig a bit more into why that's the case. But yeah, these are actually fairly large differences between Pringles and Mint Mobile is more than a standard deviation. So that's a big difference.
Okay, so how do these compare to USA Today when we start looking into the ones that did well on ad meter? So what we saw is that there was 2 very long ads that made it into the top 1 and top 2 spot for ad meter. The number 1 spot was claimed by NFL's 100-year game, as well as number 2, the Amazon Alexa, Not Everything Makes the Cut. Both humorous ads again performed, we'll talk about how they performed in our immersion rankings. But when we start digging deep into these, we see that there's quite a bit of insight to pull on how these would have done if they would have broken these out differently. So if you hold on one second, I'm going to try to broadcast a second video.
Welcome to the 100th season of the National Football League. Tonight is not about the league. It's about football. It's about the players, the fans, the moments, and everything else that makes you say,
oh boy.
Fumble! Oh! Let's go!
Joe! No can do, cowboy. Come on, TG. Damn, B. Y'all know I have more yards than they do. You still got it. Yeah, that hurt. Boy, this is a great party. Get that throw, man. Obese. Hey, come on now.
He's open. Russ.
I got you, Tony.
That's a cake.
Can I have a ball, please?
You want this? Yeah. Come and get it.
All right, so as we see here, hold on one second. Okay, so why the discrepancy? As you saw in the video, there was quite a bit of changes in immersiveness across the 2-minute long ad, one of the longest ones that was aired during the Super Bowl and capturing, the number 1 spot for ad meter. And what we saw, in fact, is for ad meter's top 10, 7 out of the 10 of the top ads were long ads. When you see our top 10, only 1 out of the top 10 were of longer ads, meaning 1 minute or longer. When we look at both of these, Amazon NFL 100-year game and Alexa, we see that there is kind of an interesting drop that happens around the 30-second spot. So we look at the top line graph, we see around 30 seconds. There is, before those 30 seconds, there's pretty good peaks in immersion happening during that first part. But after that, we kind of get it as viewers, right? We understand what's going on. For some viewers, those people have no meaning, right? For NFL fans, we can see some of our favorite football players of all time being shown there. But we kind of get it, whether or not we're football fans. There are some peaks that happen afterward, but there's a general drop that we see during this 2-minute ad, right? So in our ranking, it was number 38. But if this were to have been, say, 30 seconds, if we just look at those first 30 seconds, it would have easily made it into our top 10, right? Hitting a number 9 spot ranking. Amazon Alexa, kind of the same story, is that once we get around the 30-second mark, we actually see an even bigger dip for this one, that you basically get the idea of what the message is, and you get the content. Sure, it's still funny, and it's still, to some degree, engaging, but in terms of having your brain need to require as close attention, as close immersion with the content, that's no longer necessary. But again, if we took those 30 seconds, those first 30 seconds, this ad would have easily claimed the number 3 spot in our own rankings.
So one way to think about this, you guys, is that the brain is a pattern recognition organ. And once I see that pattern, it's less immersive, it's less impactful to my brain, because now I understand. So oftentimes we see great ads that break patterns. So establish a pattern, 1, 2, 3 beats, 4th beat, now it's something new. Oh, that's really immersive. So we almost always see a trough in immersion before a big peak, and that's because your brain can't stay at 100 miles an hour all the time. So there's these data are almost always looking like sine waves, but we want to drive up those peaks and reduce those low points. So I think in both these ads, you can see very clearly that tighter, exciting, grab me. And now to move product, to move markets, what I want to do is keep the tension high. So if you look at both those ads at the 30-second cutoff point, I have high tension. My brain's kind of on fire, and I want to do something about it. And that do something could be buy a ticket, share on social media, talk about this with my friends, purchase that item. So that's why we don't want to let that immersion dissipate, particularly in long ads. So for the NFL ads, you see it pops back up towards the end. Okay, that's good. There's some new stuff going on. Particularly, we see a couple women come into the thing. I think they're referees maybe, who are kind of into that game. So that changes the pattern that you see. Famous football player running around. So again, I think that's the key issue is if you want to have high return on experience, then I want to keep that immersion high, particularly as that ad ends.
Great. Thanks, Paul. So what we see here, right, is that the length of the ad does matter, and we can, like Paul said, start to identify how length is impacting immersiveness in the ad and what elements within that might be taken out or put back in or rearranged to be able to create a more powerful ad. I'll say, stepping back and looking at the big picture, we don't really see a major difference in terms of long ads perform worse than shorter ads. They do just slightly, but what you really end up seeing, and I think one of the key take-home messages here, is that a lot of the longer ads could easily be just as effective, and here I would argue even more effective if they were much shorter, right? If they got to the storyline or the punchline much quicker and kind of left it at that.
And you're going to save, the NFL would have saved $15 million just on airtime at, right, $5.3 million per 30 second. They could have saved 90 seconds, had higher impact, and they still had to pay the fees for all those famous football players. They burned a ton of money on this, but dissipated the potential impact because they didn't test in advance. Right? It sounds like more is better, but that's not always the case. So yeah, as George said, more is not always worse either. It's that you've got to build this great narrative structure that I want to keep watching. I need to have increasing tension. The NFL ad dissipates that tension by having essentially the same actions over and over. Famous football player throws it to another famous football player, throws it to another famous football player. Got it. Right? I understood that in the first 30 seconds. It's not that interesting until I see maybe the guy that I remember as a kid or something. So same thing with the Alexa ad. breaking patterns very important to the brain. So yeah, the NFL, wasted at least $15 million. Maybe they don't care because they have billions of dollars. But I think Amazon cares. One of Amazon's core principles is to be frugal, to do more with less. And they're not doing it this year, nor did they do it last year with another 90-second Alexa ad that wasn't that effective. So,
okay. So I don't know that. So the next question that we sought to answer or explore is whether the type of ad mattered. Did humorous ads outperform, say, emotional ads? So there was a great article written about a year or so ago in Fast Company called The Rise of Sadvertising, right? So we've seen that rise. We're still definitely experiencing that rise in sadvertising, where you see a lot of kind of pull on your heartstrings ads, right? And one of the assumptions may be that, well, if we're capturing immersion and one of those core elements is emotional resonance, then we should see there being some kind of advantage for these types of ads. So we went ahead and tested that. And what you see in this next slide is actually looking at it is that emotional ads, or these kind of sadvertising ads, did not perform as well as humor did. Humor outperformed emotional by one standard deviation at least. And it was actually even poorer than the average as well. So looking across all 48 ads that we tested for the Super Bowl, it was much lower than that average. The emotional ones were, but humor was substantially above that average as well. So here you see time series, so second by second data for two of these that are representative of the kind of trajectory that we saw for the comedic ads, for the humor ads, and for these emotional ads. So here we have the ad for Bubbly and Buble, and what you see is that there's a good start to the ad, but there's a slow rise as they slowly get to that punchline for that ad. You don't have that kind of double hump as we saw for the Chunky Milk, but you still have this kind of similar pattern as you had for Chunky Milk, that there tends to be this rise that comes over time. But for the emotional ad for Verizon, which was All Our Thanks, you do see it start off strong, and you see most of these emotional ads start off strong, but people do tend to get it pretty quickly and understand the meaning of it and why that kind of has that emotional loop. I'm happy to share a link later on to one of the other ads that we took a deep dive into, which was the Google Translate ad that's showing off how Google Translate can, open the world to you and connect you to different people. For that one, what we ended up seeing is that there was this kind of strong immersion or emotional resonance with the content early on, but around the 20 to 30 second mark, the content actually turns negative, that they show police and riot gear and graffiti and all this kind of negative content, and you see this kind of deep drop in immersion. And after that, the ad doesn't necessarily recover, even though the ad turned positive. Well, for people who are rating this ad, that's fine, right? They'll recall the positive elements of it, right? And maybe that negative elements that were in the middle can potentially be forgotten, at least consciously, but unconsciously we just don't see that. Okay. Another thing that we did, which we do every single year, is look at correlations between our immersion scores, how well the 58 ads did on immersion, and correlate them to the metrics that are provided by YouTube. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get shares this time around. We did last year. Like Paul said, we did very, very well last year in capturing views. This year, not so well. It is a significant correlation, but it's not very small, but it's small. But when it comes to those measures that are really showing that people went the extra step, right? That they actually did something physical, like click like on the ad, or make a comment on YouTube based on the ad. We see that those are correlated with immersion to a good degree. Now, again, this is not a perfect way to test ground truth. There's a lot of things that go into YouTube, right? There's a lot of ways that some ads just have more links to them, directing people to YouTube versus others. The brand has a big impact on this versus others. So there's definitely a lot of noise in terms of what's impacting views, likes, and comments, especially views. But we still see that, given all that noise, there's still a connection with immersion and these YouTube metrics. Okay. Another question we had was, do ads that get presented in the Super Bowl experience a lift? Meaning, are they more immersive than other ads that are not shown during the Super Bowl? Now, this can be for several reasons, right? The quality of the ad is much better, or the experience of the ad is much better for experiencing immersion. And what we find is that actually all our Super Bowl ads, the Super Bowl ads we tested, were well above our advertising benchmark of 3.85. When we see our top ads, they're outperforming this benchmark by a little over 16%, which is a very significant difference from benchmark. But even if we look at our bottom ads, right, our bottom 48 through 58 ads, even these are outperforming our advertising benchmark. So again, we don't know necessarily why, right? It can be that the quality of these ads are just much, much higher, or the experience of that, right? Being in a room with a lot of people in this, exciting game, maybe this year not so exciting, but just exciting altogether, looking at them on this very large screen created an opportunity to have this kind of deeper sense of immersion during that experience. I recall one moment during the testing, it was for the Michelob Ultra ad where she was making, I think it was Alicia Keys, making these quiet sounds. It was an ASMR ad. You can hear a pin drop in the room. It was extremely quiet. That sound just resonated in that room. So maybe it is partially that part of there being this cohesiveness in the group that led to greater immersion.
And I'll just jump in and answer a quick question from our friend Scott about context. Context, as George said, does matter here, right? So the reason we ran this study in a bar during Super Bowl live is because that's what you really care about, right? Not sitting in a lab in a quiet space in a basement somewhere. You want to know if this is really having an impact on real humans. So context certainly matters. And we have a case study on our website, ImmersionNeuro.com, that shows if an ad follows a highly arousing ad, arousing really means highly emotional, highly immersive, then the ad following that actually has lower immersion than if that same ad is seen with a low immersion ad. So we do get fatigued. The brain gets fatigued. And so in some sense, the Super Bowl, as George said, adds excitement. I want to pay attention. If I'm just sitting at home watching some sitcom, I might just look at my phone during the advertising time. So we sort of know the Super Bowl ads are going to be great. So it's a little more attention to them. But context certainly matters. So too much arousal, too much excitement. If that game was really exciting, it could be that the brain's fatigued and then the ads overall will be less good. So we did see that the average across all the ads we tested this year in 2019 was higher than the average in 2018. Again, it's not entirely clear how we separated out the content from, say, the excitement of the game. Last year's game was quite exciting. If you remember, the Eagles sort of won in the last couple of seconds. So anyway, different impacts, but the key is here measurement.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So moving on, we had a couple more questions that we wanted to dig into. They weren't so big, so we just kind of included them rather quickly. These are questions that we tend to get asked quite a bit, so we included them here, which are one, were there any gender differences? Did we see a difference across males and females? And we did see slightly in the aggregate, looking across all 58 ads, we do see that men tended to be slightly more immersed than females were, than women were during these. But what we really get, where we really get the split, is when we start looking at specific ads. And here I show you the top 4 ads that we have, and it starts giving you an idea of why those top 4 ads perform so well. With chunky style milk, you see that women actually were very, very much immersed in this ad. And when it comes to ads themselves, right, which are extremely passive, having a score of almost 5 is very, very high for us to get. Paul might have touched upon this quite a bit, but we don't just measure ads, but we look at experiences overall. Some are passive, some are active. So with passive experiences where you're just kind of sitting and watching something, having something getting to this range is pretty significant. But men, even though it was a high score, it was just not as high as women. And there may be certain reasons, putting my psychologist hat on here for a second, is that there are very substantial differences within how women experience emotions versus men, particularly with emotions like disgust. Disgust is a lot more likely to occur in women, both in terms of trait, dispositionally more inclined to experience it, and in state, the intensity of it tends to be a little higher. So it's clear here why that would have led to such an increase in immersion if you had this strong juxtaposition with the experience of disgust leading into humor, right? And we see that across the next 3 ads that prominently feature women, men tend to perform better. Maybe it's the attractiveness of them. We're not so sure, but you do see that moving forward, men do tend to outperform women, or tend to have greater immersion in the content that we provided. Okay, so we have a question in terms of what are the benchmark norms? Is a 4.5 a good or a great score? A 4.5 tends to be a great score. If you remember, our benchmark is around 3.85. A difference of like a 0.1 increase tends to be a significant increase above that benchmark and overall. Okay. So was there a celebrity lift? Not necessarily. When we classified the ads on whether or not they featured a celebrity or not have a celebrity within them, we basically see that these are nearly identical scores across the 58 ads that we compared. So something that we say repeatedly is a good ad is a good ad is a good ad. A celebrity might do it for one person, but in the aggregate, it's kind of hard to get that going. And we see that even in the academic literature and some of the industry literature, right, is that this tends to be kind of this mixed finding that sometimes a celebrity will improve the performance of an ad, or the performance of a persuasive message, and sometimes it won't. And here we see it really didn't. So for ads that spent a lot to have so many celebrities in them, at least from our standpoint, we don't really see a difference in the aggregate. That doesn't mean that there aren't specific celebrities that really hit it out of the park. In fact, we had a couple of ads in our top 10 that did feature celebrities. Okay. And finally, we get asked, when it airs, right? Paul talked about the content that's proximal to that, right? And sometimes experiencing this kind of fatigue or overload from other content. So we looked at it, right? One of the key, storylines from this Super Bowl was how boring it was, right? That there was just not much action until, say, the end of the fourth quarter. And did that impact our immersion scores that we measured? And what we see is that overall, if we look at the aggregate, we don't see much of a difference. In fact, between quarters, the second quarter and the fourth quarter, you pretty much see a statistical tie across all these metrics, almost a near perfect tie. The only time that we do see a difference in immersion was in the first quarter. And unfortunately, we really can't do anything besides hypothesize why this might be, right? We're more happy to hear your thoughts around this, but it can be that people were just getting situated, were just getting to understand what was going on within the game, or saying hi to new people or that they were running into in this experience. But once the game really started going, you really don't see any effect from when it played, right? And this matters, right? Is when you're trying to drop ad dollars, it might be a concern to you of when you should be showing yours. All things being equal, should I try to show it in the fourth quarter versus the third quarter? And at least here, we don't see that much of a difference. Paul?
One test of that is T-Mobile ran an ad in each quarter. And we ranked those T-Mobile ads for immersion. We saw that the quarter didn't matter. The highest immersion one, I think, was in the second quarter. The second highest was in fourth. So again, I think it's content is king here. I'd like to create great content. When I show it, less important than really the content itself.
Okay, so there's a lot to take away from our ad testing for this year's Super Bowl, but at least there's three to highlight here. First off, we see that overall the 2019 Super Bowl ads performed very well. Even some of the ones that were, unconventional or you may experience as underdogs, really did perform pretty well in comparison to benchmarks and just in comparison to one another. The ones that were much longer, we saw that really it was moments in the ad that didn't do so well rather than the aggregate.
And liking is not the right metric, right? So if you ask people about liking, that's fine and good if you like something. I'd actually rather just grab your brain and move products. So if you're interested in the ROI, then I think immersion is the better measure. And maybe that's point two, George. I've stepped on your toes, but I'll just keep going. I really think that if we're sitting down in a room with creatives, with a client, and we're talking about, well, gosh, this seems great to me, or I really like version 7 versus version 2, our measurement instrument is biased. Our own brain is biased by our experience, by whether we've slept well the night before, whether we've had a meal. It's a very biased approach. So why not grab 30 people and in 10 minutes figure out which ad is the best? I think that's, we are in the business of helping content creators create better content. And that's what consumers want. That's what clients want. And that is what doesn't frustrate people by seeing, crappy output, whether it be movies, a professor in a classroom, corporate training, or Super Bowl ads. I think all that is really great content. And again, when we built these algorithms, they were all built to predict actions, not feelings. So as many of you have heard me say when we've spoken, I think in your personal life, feelings are really important and intentions are really nice. But from a work perspective, all I care about is actions. And so through the 15 years of published research we've done on this topic, all these algorithms predicted specific actions like purchases, recall, donations to charity, posting to social media. And that's why our predictive accuracy is so high, is that we're interested in actions. And our analysis has shown that with as little as 35 people, you can accurately predict market impact. So in fact, next week, we'll be releasing a case study, a blinded study of sales bumps that we did with the advertising giant BBDO, showing how effective immersion is at predicting the top ads. And so if you're on our mailing list, you'll get a copy of that next week, including a nice video by one of the VPs at BBDO who sponsored the work. So there's nothing better than a blinded test. And the Super Bowl is something we do for fun, We think it's interesting. We think there's great insight. And I should say the George, the entire Immersion Neuroscience team did a heck of a job. They're up really late working on all this. A lot of late nights went into this analysis to really slice this data lots of ways to draw insights from it. So, George, okay, we take some questions now. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is a great time to take questions. So there should be a kind of light blue bar to your right-hand side that has a little box with 3 red dots. So if you click on that, that's our little chat area. So you can post some questions there for us to address when it comes to the presentation.
I'll take one more from Scott. I'll just use first names to protect the privacy of the innocent here. So Scott asked whether if I wanted to buy ads, I would want to be strategic about what ad precedes it, about the quality of the game, for example. Again, hard to control the quality of the game. You might want to, as you said, quarter doesn't really matter that much. So again, I think the idea here is that context does matter. Brains will fatigue in terms of immersion. Now they'll pop back, pretty quickly after a minute or so. So when we work with clients on designing studies, we suggest they put in about a minute break between content that they're showing to let that brain return to baseline. And we've shown that a minute is enough. Even 30 seconds is just fine, but a minute will get you back to baseline. So it doesn't take a long time, but if I'm hitting with high immersion, over and over and over, you're going to see some fatigue. That's just the way neurons work. So I think this is really relevant when we get to cable and on demand. So if I can choose the ads that I send based on the content that you're watching, for example, a live event, if I'm sending ads to Boston versus sending ads to LA, depending on who's winning or losing, I'd like to optimize the kind of ads you get, right? So if you're in Boston and your team is winning, don't give you a downer ad, give you some more happy ads, give you some more dominant, kind of more aggressive ads. If you're in LA and your team's losing, then it's going to be, hey, we feel your pain. This is okay. So a number of Super Bowl ads have done that in previous years where they basically filmed 2 ads. I think it was Honda that did this a couple years ago, and they played the one that was relevant for, hey, you know what, your team's behind, and we feel really bad about this, and you might want to buy a new Honda. So I think again, as we start doing very effective targeting online or cable, I think it's a very effective way to do that. George, you want to pick up one of these questions?
Sure. There's a couple more questions. Michael asks, will you be sharing the full ranking of all the ads? Sure. Yeah, we can do that. Send us a message, and we're happy to share the full list of those ads. Nelson asked, does our platform allow for collection of 38 people at the same time on a single laptop? Yes, it does. We haven't pushed the capacity of a single laptop, but conceptually and how we designed it, it should be able to handle around 100 or more. We haven't done that more so out of just not knowing what would happen at that point. But yes, 38 were done on a single laptop. We had 2 laptops going just in case for this particular project, but at every point during recording, it was just 1 laptop collecting. Scott asks, can I use immersion in other content besides video-based ads? Yes, and no. I guess the answer is it depends on what kind of content. So we've tested a lot of different things. So we've tested video ad roughs. We've tested audio only. It seems to work well there. When it comes to images, that's kind of hard because there's not much bandwidth being provided there. What we have done there is provided that content for an extended period of time. But if it's the very kind of simple, flashy 3-second thing, then that's where we would need to think a little deeper of how we would test out that content. But we've tested out several other types of experiences, like experiences in websites, experiences in theme parks, experiences in meetings, experiences within training. So our focus has not been on advertising or even video advertising. It's been all across the board. Do you want to add to that, Paul?
We did. Yeah, we had a client who works on a political campaign, and we tested 6-second bumper ads online and got very good resolution on those. It was in New York last week, and met with a social media company, and they said, we'd like 1 second resolution on 1 second pop-ups. And I said, gosh, I mean, we can collect that data, we can test that, but that's probably a little too short. So I agree with George. I think 3 seconds. This is all cloud-based, we should say. So in some sense, the cloud doesn't care if it's 38 people or 200. All you want to do is have enough hubs to get this to the cloud efficiently. So once you're talking about a single laptop or a phone, then it's easy enough to get that to the cloud with a couple of hubs. So you got to have some network to get it to the cloud.
Right. Yeah, and as of 2019, as of this year, we develop a mobile app, so you no longer need the laptop. So imagine doing a project for, a theme park. You can place sensors on people, have the app going, and have them go on different rides, and track them to see where they are and what their immersion is on different rides while they're waiting in line, while they're grabbing popcorn or candy or whatever. So we have made it so that we can capture immersive experiences where they happen rather than just in the lab. Scott asked a couple questions here. What was our audience like for the Super Bowl test? We are here in Claremont, California, which is a small town about 40 minutes east of Los Angeles. And I'll say out of the 38 people, we had a pretty good distribution in terms of ages, somewhere between 22 to 62 or so. And I would say there was no overrepresentation of, say, young versus middle versus old. We had a pretty good distribution in terms of both age and race as well, ethnicity as well. So I was actually kind of excited to see how many people got together to watch the Super Bowl, and seeing how much diversity we had in the sample.
And one thing we controlled for, which we didn't talk about here, was, are you a football fan in general? Are you a fan of the Rams or the Patriots? None of that actually mattered. So people have asked us in other projects about geographic differences, and we have tested those extensively and generally don't find them. So when it comes to immersion, brains work pretty much the same. So I think from a testing perspective, it means having the the exact distribution of who you want or where they live is not as important as really testing that content. Now, I think the demographics do matter when you start to do targeting with our evangelist algorithm. So I would want a nice broad sample to see, as we saw with the gender issues, if I want to break it down by gender or by age or by ethnicity, then I want to have those represented so I have enough confidence statistically in that sample from a targeting perspective. But from an overall immersion, not an overall big difference. So I think we're up in the 10 o'clock hour.
Yep.
Thank you guys for joining us so much. It was really a pleasure spending time with you. This will be up online in a couple of hours on our website. And we look forward to having more and more conversations with you as we continue this journey to create highly immersive content. All right. Yep. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.